today we will learn some rules. Apart from the Venn diagram, we have some rules also which are used to test the validity of any syllogism. There are altogether 6 rules. The first rule says that in a syllogism there should be exactly 3 terms, neither more nor less. And if there are 4 terms, then there will be a fallacy of 4 terms. This is a kind of figurative usage. Fallacy of 4 terms simply means that the argument involves more than 3 terms. And you know that there could be maximally 6 terms. Taken all the propositions together, there could be maximally 6 terms. But you know the definition of syllogism. It says that there should be exactly 3 terms. Look at this particular example. All plants have chlorophyll. All factories are plants, and therefore all factories have chlorophyll. So if you look at the structure of this argument, it is basically triple A1. So all are A, and if you look at the subject here, and if you look at predicate here, so subject and predicate, here you have subject, and the remaining term is your middle term, and then you have predicate here and middle term here. So if you look at the relationship, this is basically figure A, and this logical structure triple A1 is a valid structure. You can just check through Venn diagram. You can easily see that if you have MP, this is A proposition, so this will be MP bar equal to 0. Then SM bar, again A proposition, so this will be 0. And if you look at the conclusion, so again this is A proposition, so it will be SP bar, and that is again 0. So you have to just depict the premises. So MP bar, the area of middle which is outside of P is 0. MP bar is depicted this way. The area of middle which is outside of P, wherever you have bar, you consider that is excluded. So MP bar is 0, then SM bar is 0. The area of subject outside of middle, the area of subject which is outside of middle, that is 0. And now you can just read the conclusion. Conclusion demands that SP bar is 0. So the area of subject which is outside of P is 0, which you can easily see here. This is the area of subject which is outside of predicate. So it is already 0. So if you look at rule and all the diagrammatic representation, then it looks a valid argument. But actually it is not valid. Now why it is not valid? We have to look at the expression. All plants have chlorophyll. All factories are plants. So the meaning of plant here and the meaning of plant here, you can easily sense that these meanings are different. All plants have chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is the property of a natural plant. And when we use expression plant for a factory or for any industry, then we don't mean that thing in fact. We don't mean that it is a natural plant. We consider this is an artificial organization, and the plant expression is used figuratively. It's a kind of metaphor. So here it is metaphorical and here it is literal. In the first major premise, it is literally plant, but in the second premise, it is metaphorically plant. And therefore, they are different meanings. Because they are different meanings, they cannot be called the same term. So what we call middle, structurally it looks like middle, but actually this is different and this is different. So in this way, you see that there are 4 terms basically in this argument. And because of that, this argument is having this fallacy, the fallacy of 4 terms. So how do we decide that there is a fallacy of this kind? By looking into the meaning of the expressions. So in our introductory course, we have not included this particular rule. The remaining rules we will learn, and they will be used for testing the syllogism. Okay, so you know that the propositions distribute their term. A proposition distributes its subject term. E proposition distributes both terms. I proposition distributes no term, and then O proposition distributes predicate term, right? So that is the status of distribution in all the 4 propositions. Rule 2nd says that middle term must be distributed at least once. there are two occurrences of middle term, and the requirement is that middle term must be distributed at least once. एक बार उसको distribute होना ही है. Wherever it occurs in the whole, it must be distributed at least once. If it is not distributed at least once, then the syllogism will be invalid. Any invalid argument has fallacy. So if the middle term is not distributed in any argument, it is invalid, and any invalid argument involves fallacy. And the fallacy which is due to the non-distribution of middle term is called the fallacy of undistributed middle term. Now, let us take an example. Let us take this example, AII2. So, you know figure 2. What is the figure 2? The moment you come to know that this is second figure, you can easily write the whole of structure of the syllogism. So, now look at the status of distribution. You know A proposition distributes its subject term. So A distributes predicate term. I does not distribute any term. So here you see middle is not distributed. Similarly, I does not distribute any terms. Nothing is distributed in I. Middle term is not distributed anytime. The second rule requires that middle term should be distributed at least once. And you can easily see that this is not a valid argument by using Venn diagram. So A and I, A is universal, I is particular. So we will first choose universal. For our depiction, this is always a convention. You choose the universal proposition first for depiction. The area of predicate which is outside of middle is 0. PM bar is 0. Now let us depict SM is not 0. So look at the area which is common between subject and middle. This is the area. The area of subject and middle is populated. It is not 0. So you have to put cross somewhere. Now, if you look at this area in between, this is to tell you how you are going to put cross. In this area, if you look, here you have the area which is subject and middle, and here you have area which is subject, middle, and predicate. This area is between all three. So now there is a confusion because the proposition says that we have to put a cross between the common area of subject and middle. And this is the whole area which is subject and middle. But in this area, there are two kinds of regions. This region is only subject and middle, but this region is all three, subject, middle, and predicate. When we have this kind of situation, so we have to make a decision that whether cross should be put here or somewhere in between. So in that situation, the rule is that you need to put the cross at the border line of the term which is not in question. The term subject term है, middle term है, दो term है, तो वो तो है ही है. So which term is not available here? It is the predicate which is not available. So the cross must be put at the border of the predicate. Why? Because the proposition does not clearly say whether the member which is populating this area is also a member of predicate or not. The proposition simply says that subject and middle, common area of subject and middle is not 0. It does not tell whether that person is also in the predicate or not. So in that situation, we have to keep that doubt. There is a doubt whether this member is in the predicate or not. So we have to keep the doubt by putting the cross on the border line of the predicate. So here you are not saying whether it is member of predicate or it is not the member of predicate. You are keeping this doubt open, right? So it's like having India-Pakistan border. You have put someone on the LOC border line, and therefore you can neither say that the person belongs to India or Pakistan, right? But certainly you say that yes, there is this common area to which this person belongs. Now read whether the conclusion is depicted or not. So it says that subject and predicate के बीच में cross होना चाहिए. The area which is clearly in between subject and predicate. So you see this area between subject and predicate. Up to here it is already shaded. This cross is not actually falling clearly under this area of subject and predicate. It is merely sitting on the boundary. ये जो क्रॉस है ये बॉर्डर पे है, ये क्लियरली सब्जेक्ट और प्रेडिकेट के बीच में नहीं है, and therefore we don't count this person as a member of the common area of subject and predicate, and this way this is decided invalid. It is invalid because the diagram does not show that subject and predicate, the common area between subject and predicate is 0. So this way you have to make decision always. So this is invalid argument, and since this argument is invalid, so it has a fallacy. What is that fallacy? That we have seen here, middle term is not distributed. So the name of the fallacy is the fallacy of undistributed middle term. This is second rule. Now let us see the third rule. It says that if a term is distributed in the conclusion, then this is a conditional statement. If a term is distributed in the conclusion, then it must be distributed in a premise. And if it is not, then there is a fallacy. Okay, so look at this. So now rule says, rule 3 demands that if the subject term is distributed, so here subject term is distributed. Subject term is distributed here, but here it is not distributed in the minor premise. I does not distribute any term, so you have put cross here. Look at it. So it has the fallacy of illicit minor. Similarly, it has fallacy of illicit major also, because major term is distributed in the conclusion, but not in the major premise. It has also the fallacy of undistributed middle term, जो second rule अभी आपने देखा. Middle term is not distributed anytime. Here it is undistributed in major and minor. Both the cases, middle term is not distributed. So this particular argument has got 3 fallacies. This is invalid, और इसके fallacies देखिए क्या है. So it has 3 fallacies. All these 3 fallacies. Okay. Now let us learn another rule. Rule number 4. Rule number 4 says that no syllogism can be valid with 2 negative premises. If both major and minor, both premises are negative, then the syllogism cannot be valid. So for this also you can take any example, consider both the premises are negative, and therefore the name of the fallacy is exclusive premises. It has another fallacy also. If you look at, certainly it does not have the distribution of middle term fallacy, because you know this is O proposition and O distributes its middle term, right? So middle is distributed once, and not just once, it is twice. E distributes middle and predicate both. E is distributing both the terms. So there is no fallacy of undistributed middle term. But look at this situation. Conclusion distributes the subject term. But minor premise में minor premise O है, O distributes only one term, predicate term. It does not distribute subject term. So this particular argument, this particular syllogism involves this fallacy. It violates rule number 4, and therefore it is having exclusive premises fallacy. It has also illicit minor. Remember, it has illicit minor. Why it has illicit minor along with exclusive premises? क्यों है ऐसा? क्योंकि कंक्लूजन में मिडिल टर्म, कंक्लूजन में सब्जेक्ट टर्म डिस्ट्रीब्यूट हो रहा है और प्रेमिस में नहीं हो रहा है. All right. So it has 2 fallacies, exclusive premises and illicit minor. Rule number 5 says that if one premise is negative, then the conclusion has to be negative. Rule 4 says that both premises cannot be negative, right? Rule 5 says that, okay, both cannot be negative, but one can be negative. So it restricts the conclusion again. If one premise is negative, then it will produce only negative conclusion validly. EAA3 वेन डायग्राम के लिए हमको इक्वेशन चाहिए, तो E का इक्वेशन है SP इक्वल टू 0, A का इक्वेशन है SP बार इक्वल टू 0, so here you have MS bar is 0, and then A का इक्वेशन है SP bar equal to 0, so this way you will have 0. Okay, so let us see. It has violation of the rule 5, and therefore the fallacy which is called is drawing an affirmative conclusion from a negative premise. This is the name of the fallacy. रूल 5 के वायलेशन से जो फैलेसी होती है, दैट मीन्स एक प्रेमिस अगर नेगेटिव है और कंक्लूजन अफर्मेटिव हो गया तो ये फैलेसी होगी, और उसको कहते हैं ड्राइंग एन अफर्मेटिव कंक्लूजन फ्रॉम ए नेगेटिव प्रेमिस, राइट. So this is a little descriptive fallacy, drawing an affirmative conclusion from negative premise. So इसमें ये fallacy है. और भी कोई fallacy है आप लोगों को कुछ दिख रहा है? So you can start from the beginning. You can see whether there is undistributed middle. So you can see E has distribution of middle as well as predicate. A has distribution of middle, and here also this is the status of distribution. Distribution का status हमने सर्कल में कर दिया. So distribution हमने सर्कल कर दिया, ये सब terms distributed हैं. So consider रूल नंबर 2 कहता है मिडिल टर्म मस्ट बी डिस्ट्रीब्यूटेड एट लीस्ट वंस, तो दैट इज सेटिस्फाइड बिकॉज हियर बोथ द टर्म्स ऑफ मिडिल आर डिस्ट्रीब्यूटेड. सो सेकंड रूल इज इंटैक्ट. थर्ड रूल सेज दैट इफ एनी टर्म इज डिस्ट्रीब्यूटेड इन द कंक्लूजन it must be distributed in the premise. So you look at this. Conclusion में subject term distributed है, but look at the minor premise. Here it is not distributed. So this particular syllogism involves illicit minor also. Why? Because minor is distributed in the conclusion but not in the minor premise. Therefore it has that fallacy. तो इसमें दो फैलेसी हो गए, एक तो ये हो गया रूल नंबर 5 का वायलेशन, और दूसरा इलिसिट माइनर भी हो गया रूल नंबर 3 का वायलेशन. देन द लास्ट रूल, रूल नंबर 6, it says that if both the premises are universal then we cannot derive a particular conclusion. अगर दोनों premise universal हैं तो they cannot produce any conclusion which is particular. So you can take an example for this also. For example, if you say, you take any example, A, double A, let us say double A, and then take any example which is particular. So I, double A I, and then you can take any figure. So maybe figure 4 you can choose. This particular rule is triggered by Boolean consideration of existence, right? Existential fallacy होता है if you have universal propositions as premises and particular proposition as conclusion. So clearly universal propositions do not involve existential commitment. यूनिवर्सल प्रोपोजिशन में एग्जिस्टेंशियल कमिटमेंट नहीं होता है. जॉर्ज बूल ने जो बात कही थी, और पर्टिकुलर में होता है, राइट. पर्टिकुलर क्रॉस की डिमांड करते हैं, यूनिवर्सल क्रॉस की डिमांड नहीं करता है. यू हैव टू सी दैट दिस इज इनवैलिड. कैसे इनवैलिड है? कंक्लूजन डिमांड्स एसपी नॉट जीरो. एसपी का जो एरिया है उसमें ये एरिया खाली है, and there is no cross, right? So this is invalid, and the fallacy which is here is called existential fallacy. So these are the distribution status, right? Middle is distributed, predicate is distributed. So middle is distributed once, so second rule is intact, second rule is not violated. Third rule says that if any term is distributed in the conclusion, then it must be distributed in the premises. So no term is distributed in the conclusion, so there is no requirement for violation of third rule. Fourth rule says that both the premises cannot be negative, so both are affirmative, so that is also kept. Fifth rule says that if one premise is negative, then conclusion must be negative, so that is also not the case. Both the premises are affirmative, conclusion is also affirmative. So all other rules are followed except rule 6, and therefore this is called existential fallacy. तो जब इस तरह की सिचुएशन होगा तो you have to write like that.